The Mazdayasnian Confession. 1. I drive the Avesta hence. I confess, as a Mazda worshipper of the order of Zarathustra, estranged from the Avesta, devoted to the Lord, a praiser of the bountiful immortals, and to Ahura Mazda, the good and endowed with good possessions. I attribute all things good to the Holy One, the resplendent, to the glorious, whose are all things whatsoever, which are good, whose is the kind, whose is Asha, the righteous order pervading all things pure, whose are the stars, in whose lights the glorious beings, the objects are clothed. 2. And I choose piety, the bounteous and the good. Mine may she be, and therefore I loudly depreciate all robbery and violence against the sacred, kine, and all drought, to the wasting of the Mazdayasnian villages. 3. Away from their thoughts do I wish to lead the thought of, wandering at will, away the thought of, free nomadic pitching of the tent, for I wish to remove all wandering from their kine, which abide in steadfastness upon this land, and bowing down in worship. In righteousness I dedicate my offerings, with praise, so far as that never may I stand as a source of wasting, never as a source of withering to the Mazdayasnian villages, not for the love of body or of life. 4. Away do I abjure the shelter and headship of the Avesta, evil as they are, utterly bereft of good, and void of virtue, deceitful in their wickedness. Of all beings, the most like the demon of the lie, the most loathsome of existing things, and the ones the most of all bereft of good. 5. Off do I abjure the Avesta, and all possessed by them, the sorcerers, and all that hold to their devices, and every existing being of the sort. Their thoughts do I abjure, their words and actions, and their seed, that propagate their sin. Away do I abjure the shelter and their headship, the iniquitous of every kind, who act as Rakshasas act. Thus, and so, in every deed might Ahura Mazda have indicated to Zarathustra, in every question which Zarathustra asked, and in all the consultations in which they two conversed together. 6. Thus and so might Zarathustra have abjured the shelter and headship of the Avesta in all the questions and in all the consultations with which they two conversed together, Zarathustra and the Lord. And so I myself, in whatsoever circumstances I may be placed, as a worshipper of Mazda and of Zarathustra's order, would so abjure the Avesta and their shelter as he who was the holy Zarathustra abjured them once of old. 7. To that religious sanctity to which the waters appertain do I belong, to that sanctity which the plants, to that sanctity which the kine of the blessed gift, to that religious sanctity to which Ahura Mazda, who made both kine and holy men, belongs. To that sanctity do I, of that creed which Zarathustra held, which Kava, Vistaspa, and those two, Frasha Astra and Gamaspa, yea, of that religious faith which every Sa'ashant who shall yet come to save us, the holy ones, who do the deeds of real significance of that creed and of that lore, am I. 8. A Mazda worshipper am I, of Zarathustra's order, so do I confess, as a praiser and a confessor, and I therefore praise aloud the well-thought thought, the well-spoken word, and the deed well done. 9. Yea, I praise at once the faith of Mazda, the faith which has no faltering utterance, the faith that wields the felling halberd, the faith of the kindred marriage, the holy creed, which is the most inspiring, best, and most beautiful of all religions which exist and of all shall in future come to knowledge, Ahura's faith, the Zarathustrian creed, yea, to Mazda do I ascribe all good, and such shall be the worship of the Mazdayasnian belief. And noticing how that's 9 verses, it doesn't quite match up with the monarchy with Angkor Mainhu and Gnog Manog and the 7. So that's, but what does match up is there's the demonic answer, and then there's the answer from God, the answer that puts one in line with the archangels, the bountiful immortals, as they're called here. And one thing that interests, that passage in the Quran, the people you're not supposed to marry, the next of kin marriage, there was a particular point at the Achaemenid dynasty where they started doing that once. So yeah, and the planets and stuff were more important to the astrology, the soothsayers. So that's why we have a focus on the stars so much. And the prominence and supremacy of each entity or genius, while especially the object of, respect, you could say at the least, in the ritual order, the expressions taken from the Ahuna area, and where into the offering takes place, the sacred lordship, and the chieftainship. The prominent, same note, why in the world same note? In verse 4, we mentioned the good mind, Bahumana, Asha, and Kshatra, and the female and the male ones as well, Aramaete, Ha'urvatat, and Amarat At. Now the gendering may not have been taken literally or something earlier, but like some people would say all the angel names with Al were males, and all the angel names with Yah were females or something, but that's not really accurate either. So it would seem that the Yasna must have at some time been celebrated in the houses of the worshippers. Hence perhaps some of the priests were Pa Ere Gathans, and Dahyuma is the third on that list in 10. And the life furtherer, Ebegeya, and then we have after verse 11, what's the next one? 48. Okay. Elsewhere, beings do we worship who are as such. There's different wording in different places. That's why I questioned the other place where, this is the same as over here. Are there some variations? And if there are, there can be a lot of importance in that. And so moving on to the sacrifice continues, because that's, that's what they said with Yasna 5, is that Yasna 5 was the same as 37, which should have paused, but to scratch my ear, but we got the sacrifice continues with a fuller expression. This chapter differs from Yasna 2 only in having Yazama Edde instead of the formula Ahmiya Zathre Beresmana Eka Ayese Yeste. and some expressions are varied in the Zen words, but how purposefully is that the composition or something? Because so with Asha, it's the note. I don't. Oh, we're on to the next chapter. Presentation of offerings by the priest with the object named. So complete and sacred offering. So we're saying it's with Asha, possibly for a blessing, as Asha has often the sense of a reward, but scrupulous sanctity and completeness seems to be the sense here. And something, an alternative is shut out. I don't have trouble turning the pages. Okay, hemmed in are shut out. Verse 6 of offering of the meat offering, particularly the faithful take part. I will incite even I, whom Zarathustra. We have peace as a reproduction, or a close imitation of some earlier fragment. It sounds like an exhortation delivered while the faith was still new. Well, certain things would be naturally repeated. The repression and the shame. 8. The Pahlavi translator, as I think, had a text before him which read, Bulsvatram. I so correct against the keen and most interesting suggestion of Dus Athrem. I'm compelled to note Ahvathra, showing a composition A and Havatra, which seems not probable if A and Hu and Athra, Duzathra, not Ahvatra, would have been written. Haveng can be as Havan, as root, and the existence of the wicked, so the house of the wicked. So in the morning from 6 to 10, and when we talk about these hours in ancient times, they were not talking about the hours on the clock, but the hours of the, I mean, we're into the notes on the Homyast here. The hours are in reference to the, the hour of Havana. They are, like, well, okay, so, well, wouldn't that be the dawn prayer rather than the sunrise prayer? But if it's the sunrise prayer, yeah, it's the first 4 out of 6 of the morning. Morning is in when the sun's at the highest, and dividing that into 6 parts. And so that's what's meant. And the beautiful of life is what we have in verse 2. Wait, no. Beautiful in thine own body. And so the plant spirit of Ha'ama are really the mix of it, more likely. Because maybe Zarathustra was sick. You don't blame somebody for doing what they need to do to get well. And honestly, there's differences in dosing when it comes to getting well and, people trying to just enjoy themselves or something. And We're speaking well of things. In 3. So, I'm sorry. Ma is omitted as interrupting the rhythm. Seems to be merely dramatic, or did it indicate there was an original Zarathustrian Ha'ama Gatha, from which this is an extension? And the entire 16th verse of this might be placed in the middle of all this. Between verse 3 and 4. So what's the 16th verse? Maybe I'll share that. Thereupon spake Zarathustra, praise be to Ha'ama, good as Ha'ama, the well-endowed, exact and righteous in its nature, and goodly, inherently healing, and beautiful of form, and good in deed, and most successful in working, golden-hued, with bending sprouts, as it is the best for drinking, so, through its sacred stimulus, is it the most nurturous for the soul. And the 5th from, we're Vivangavant at the next verse. Well, not that, in verse 4. The 5th from Gaya Maritan, the Iranian Adam, but his counterpart, the Indian Vivasvat, appears not only as a father of Yama, but of Manu, and of a lot of the entities considered to be gods, promoted mortals. So there's 2 thick truths that you could say are represented there. Is that human beings invent claims about who's a god and all that other stuff. And the second is that a lot of them are, the station of human beings gets exaggerated. The sun-like one of men, it's kind of like, Venus is more of the, Venus was called Lucifer. But the sun-like one, that's another way of saying a Lucifer. But I'm not talking about some demon or something. I'm talking about more literal, before all this fictionalized references that were used as hate speech. But Savar, Drisas, Pavamanas. And the males, like the females, seem to have been considered as developed at 15 years of age. Well, it was, you give them a little bit, well, it makes more sense that there's a difference. In Islamic theology, in the Sunni references, you see that Muhammad wouldn't consider any female under 13 or any male under 15 for the further questions to figure out whether they were adults. Not only adults, but sane and ready to take charge of their property and all that sort of stuff. So that, there'd naturally be a difference like that, but 15 was an ideal age, just like 30 in other ways was an ideal age. And Trita Aptea is, with the note Atwiya, second who prepared for the corporeal world. Thra et Ta'ana, also in verse 7, of the heroic tribe. Compare the Indian Tra et Tana, connected with Treta. Let it be remembered that Treta smote the Ahe before Indra, Indra seeming only to reenact the more original victory which the Avesta notices. Concerning Asa Dahaka, see Winchman's Zenstudian, and we talk about freeing. For the driving death of power. In the Rig Veda, Aptya seems Well, just like the Goliath thing. Goliath's a term, and if 3 people killed Goliath, that's one issue that I'm, as many issues as there are in the Bible, that's not really an issue that 3 people ended up killing Goliath. Let it be remembered that Trita smote the Ahe before Indra seeming only to reenact the more original. Oh, wait, I said that. And the Rig Veda, Aptya, seems only an epithet added to the name Trita and to that of other entities. And the 2 serpents of the Avesta are suspicious. 2 names seem to have become 2 persons, or has the Avesta the more correct representation. All sort of a sinister reference to the same sort of thing that you find with the myth of Jesus on the cross and that sort of thing. Is the 2 criminals beside him. I mean, it could be spirit snakes, could be some Kundalini reference, or the different channels weaving up, and and the Semites might be being referred to by the Samas. They certainly penetrated as conquerors far into Media. It seems uncritical to deny their leaving traces. The gloss may be very old, and Kapar Dinam, the ringlet-headed and scorched upstarted, in verse 11, I abandon reluctantly the admirable comparison of Havis with Indian Sved, says Geldner. Also, when explained as an, he's showing how he differs with Geldner and Bartholomew, as when explained as an incoative, but the resulting meaning is far from natural, either here or in Vendidad 3:32, that the dragon should begin to sweat under the fire which was kindled upon his back, and which caused him to spring away, seems difficult. The process was not so deliberate. He was scorched, started, and then sprang. So Vendidad 3:32, where the barley is produced, the demons hardly sweat. With mental misery, the idea is to advance for the document. Bernau's and Haug's hiss was much better in places, but I prefer the hint of Bafali La Vaslund in Vendidad 3:32. Kist Hamand. Now Yosong has Tap Taska Sa Nris Amsa Kukshuba Dvie Pado Babruva, whether Visatka or Hisatka has anything to do with his or his, Pathapi Akhiz I Dano or Akhez I Dano, and his Edon is a question. I follow tradition without etymological help. Perhaps you might as well write the word like a better known form as a conjecture. And the Pathapi with the frightened, manly-minded Karisaspa makes an attempt to account for the epithet manly-minded as applied to Karisaspa, well, yet he fled affrighted. He says, Homand Mard Minesni Hana Yehavund Aigas Lebemam Pavan Gastast. There Yosung has Asya Pa Urushaman Nasatvam Idam Babova Yad Asau Ka Itanyam Shtane Dadvau. His manly-mindedness was this, that he kept his wits on the occasion. And see the story treated somewhat differently in the Yasts by Dharmastetter. And the son of Pa-Etirasp are Spetarasp, according to the Bundahist. 32 was the Po-Urushaspa mentioned in verse 13. And in verse 14, the Ahuna, the area, it's in the Gathic dialect, and the Ahuna Vaete meter is what it's in, and it may have been composed by Zarathustra. It named the Gatha. And we would compare Yasna 30, verse 6, to the reference to the two spirits. And most successful in its working, freeing, in verse 16, for inspiration, compare the Path Meng Gavoe and understanding or is Madhem related to Medha? The inspiration. The most nutritious is what you compare to Pathmeng Gavoe. And the inspiration, do we relate it to Mazda, the feminine version of the mindful Lord. In the Pahlavi, we have Farzanaki in verse 17 here of understanding. The sorcerers and the sirens in verse 18, we talk about witches. And all sorts of cultures mention witches. Let's drop the New Age nonsense about how witches were those who consciously worked with demons. They treated these things as gods and bled for them, or whatever they had to do for them. The Pahlavi Sastarano. The tyrants. Well, I didn't really finish my thought, but people acting like a witch is just what they referred to as the female medicine workers, or the people who, were just not Christian. And no, the pre-Christians didn't like what was going on with these people either. Pavan Frif Tari. Now you're saying has Pratar an Ataya in the place of, the stratagems. In verse 19, we have mentioned the radiant, all glorious. Vispo Havathrem does not mean comfortable here. Havan is the root. Compare Havang, sun. The Pahlavi has Min Havastar, and the desire is gained. And later in verse 20, we have the conquering in battles. The Pahlavi has Vanidar Pavan Kushano. And in verse 22, Haoma grants to racers. Arvanto is Aurvanto, and the Pahlavi Arvan. And Ha'ama lowered Karasana. 24. Compare the Vedic Kresanu, archer, and demon entity who guarded the Soma. Now your saying seems to notice that the name recalls that of the Christians. Now, one of the things that you could say with that is that, because remember how it was saying the people who, basically the people who took it not for health reasons, but to enjoy themselves, and the people who were stingy with it, and so the overindulgers at the very least, and the people who withheld it from the people who should be having it. Well, isn't that what a lot of priests do? Well, the Catholics kind of pass around the Mass, but the wine they're serving is the same. They pass around among themselves outside of the services too. So no priest behind and watching. So the Ptolemy before others read a pas, kind of like fras. And Haug's keen-sighted suggestion with the reference to the girdle. Po urvanim, pa urva, the Pleiades, and ni, leading P, looks doubtful and seems refuted by Yast 24, verse 29, where Dermasteter renders a word probably akin as the many. I would here render the former. Well, a lot of the Semelic elements connect to certain things in the stars. And you got the grasp, or the summary of them, mentioning the headings in verse 26. In verse 30, we have the roused and fearful dragon. And the Pathli has Sakmanan, Naryoseng has Kyamkara, and strike thy curb, committing deeds, hurl thy mace, and the one committing deeds unheard of, deeds apart, evil deeds, and the people against the words of our religion, we're being free from them, and the pleasures, that was verse 31, the pleasures, intoxicating pleasures, and whose mind is vapor, are the notes in 32. So we have holding on, the clinging, like in Buddhism. Yanhe must be an error, otherwise offering the person whose mind is as vapor waters. And the first note in the yasna, let the female demon entities and the male female demon entities fly far away. We have the Pahlavi as corrected in the manuscript Dastur Hoshange Gamaske has bara akarmen latamman paden bara shada. Naryoseng has reta paskat asmat